Welcome back to So What Does That Mean? The podcast where we break down engineering, planning, and construction in plain English. I'm Brendan, the engineer.
And I'm Joanne, the non-engineer. If you're a developer, builder, homeowner, or just someone trying to make sense of the construction world, you're in the right place.
Every episode, we take a topic that costs people real money, real time, and real stress, and we unpack it so you actually understand what's going on, why it matters, and what you can do about it.
No jargon walls, no lectures, just practical, common sense advice from the people who see these problems every single day. So Brendan, I want to talk about something that makes people really angry. Flooding, specifically sites that flood after development. And in most cases, it's not an act of God, it's an act of bad engineering.
Yeah. Look, this is one of those topics where I genuinely see people lose tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars because nobody explained it to them up front. So let's get into it.
Okay, I know you love a good stat, so let's talk numbers in flooding. Because I think most people assume flooding is a natural disaster problem. Cyclones, once in 100-year events, acts of God. But the data tells a very different story, doesn't it?
It really does. And I want to start with a number that I think should be at the front page of every property section in Australia. As of April 2025, flood risk has wiped $42.2 billion from Australian home values. $42 billion. That's not damage from floods. That's the reduction in property values simply because homes are in areas identified as being flood prone.
$42 billion from value reduction alone.
From value reduction alone. And here's what makes it worse. 40% of those affected properties are right here in Queensland. The total value lost to flood risk in Queensland alone is $19 billion. And within Queensland, the Gold Coast is the hardest hit region in the state. $4.5 billion in property value gone because of flood risk. These aren't theoretical numbers. This is real money that real homeowners have lost.
So if you buy a house in a flood-prone area, how much less is it actually worth compared to the house next door that isn't in the flood zone?
On average, nationally, a typical flood-prone home is worth $75,500 less than a comparable home without a flood risk. And the gap is getting wider. Since the year 2000, the price growth gap between flood-prone and flood-free homes has reached 22 percentage points. So it's not just that you pay less going in. Your investment grows slower over time too.
And what about insurance? Because I've heard some horror stories about premiums.
The insurance numbers are eye-watering. Households in flood-prone areas are spending up to a full month's gross income in insurance premiums alone. Around 1.6 million Australian households were experiencing insurance affordability stress in 2024. And some insurers are simply pulling out of high-risk areas altogether. They just won't cover you at any price. The Commonwealth Bank has estimated that 39,000 properties worth $17 billion are at severe flood risk. So we're talking about properties that may become effectively uninsurable and unmortgageable.
That's wild. So what about actual flood damage? The claims, the payouts?
In 2022 alone, there were more than 300,000 flood-related insurance claims, totaling $7.4 billion in losses. $7.4 billion in a single year. And over the past 5 years, floods have accounted for more than 54% of all losses from declared insurance events in Australia. More than half. More than storms, bushfires, cyclones. Floods are the single biggest destroyer of property in this country.
And it's getting worse, right?
Much worse. Natural disasters are currently costing the Australian economy around $38 billion a year, according to a Deloitte study, and that's projected to grow to at least $73 billion by 2060. In the first half of 2025 alone, back-to-back disaster events cost the economy $2.2 billion, and climate projections suggest This will keep accelerating.
So where does this connect back to what we do? To engineering, to development, to subdivisions?
This is a critical point. A huge portion of these flood-related property losses aren't from 100-year storm events rolling through the existing suburbs. They're from properties that were developed, subdivided, graded, built on without adequate stormwater engineering. Water-sensitive urban design is what we call it in the engineering industry. When you change the natural drainage of a site, you change where the water goes. And if the engineering doesn't properly account for increased runoff, overland flow paths, and downstream impacts, you create flood risk that didn't exist before. That flood risk then attaches to every single lot, every single house, every single owner in that development. And it follows them forever in their property values, in their insurance premiums, and in the very real chance of water through their living room.
Let me just make sure I've got these numbers right, because they are honestly hard to believe. 42 billion wiped from home values, 19 billion in Queensland alone, $75,000 average loss per flood-prone home, and 7.4 billion in flood claims in a single year. 54% of all insurance losses come from floods, and 38 billion a year in total disaster costs, heading towards 73 billion by 2060.
Yep, those are the numbers. And the engineering to prevent a lot of this: proper stormwater management plans, proper overland flow analysis, proper drainage design. That typically costs between $10,000 and $30,000 on a subdivision project. Compare that to billions of dollars in damage. It's the most obvious investment anyone could make.
All right, so let's set the scene. Someone buys a new house in a new estate, and after the first big rain, the yard is underwater. What's actually going on here?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you need to do is you need to identify the lawful point of discharge. Every property has one. It's where is the water going to go? Where can it go so that it doesn't adversely affect anybody else, or doesn't adversely affect the property itself from the water flowing away from the property. Every property must direct stormwater to an approved outlet. When land is subdivided and developed, impervious area increases massively. Roofs, driveways, roads, which means more water running off faster. If you think about it, you've got a block of land that has grass, has earth, has basically in its natural look, there's no development on it. If you have water coming from a rainfall event onto that land, portion of that is going to get absorbed into the ground. Whereas once you develop and you have structures like roofs, like driveways, like roads built onto that land, that water is going to be 100% captured, and it is then going to run off somewhere. If the civil design doesn't properly account for this increased runoff, or worse, if it directs water towards the neighbouring property, you will get flooded. In southeast Queensland, with our intense subtropical rainfall events, even small design oversights create major flooding. The controversial reality: many flooding problems in new estates are caused by poor stormwater design during the subdivision phase, but the blame falls onto the homeowner.
That sounds like a developer or a council problem, though, right? Can't people just go back to whoever approves the subdivision?
This is where it gets messy. Councils approve stormwater designs based on engineering reports and certification, but approved doesn't always mean perfect. Designs can meet minimum code requirements and still result in practical flooding issues. We discussed this in a previous episode. The same principle applies to stormwater. Just because you adhere to the minimum code doesn't mean the design is the best suited design for the development and the specific site constraints that you will have. Once the subdivision is complete and lots are sold, the developer moves on. Homeowners are left dealing with the consequences. A lot of developers that we've dealt with before are concerned about getting it approved and getting it sold. They're not concerned about what happens in 5 years, in 10 years, or 20 years. A lot of the time, we find inter-allotment drainage is an issue, where stormwater from one lot is supposed to flow through another via an easement, but the system is undersized or blocked. Whose responsibility is that?
What about overland flow paths? I've heard the term thrown around a lot in flood reports.
Overland flow paths are the routes which water takes when the underground pipe system is overwhelmed, typically in major storm events, like 1 in 100 year events or similar. These must be identified and maintained during subdivision and building design. The problem is, developers sometimes fill or block natural overland flow paths during earthworks, which then redirects water into places it was never meant to go. Queensland's state planning policy requires post-development flows to not worsen pre-development conditions, but proving a breach after the fact is expensive and slow. Homeowners building on lots with overland flow paths need to understand this before they design their house, not after they get a flood through the living room.
So, what about climate change? Are the old stormwater designs still fit for purpose with the rainfall events we're seeing now?
This is a huge and somewhat controversial topic in the industry right now. Australian rainfall and runoff guidelines have been updated, and some councils, like the Sunshine Coast Council, are now applying interim climate change factors that increase design rainfall intensities. Many existing subdivisions were designed to older standards with lower rainfall assumptions. The uncomfortable truth: some infrastructure that was compliant when built may no longer be adequate for the rainfall events we're now experiencing. This doesn't mean every old estate is going to flood, but it does mean that anyone doing new development needs to design for the future, not the past. JCE's approach: always design to current best practice and consider future climate scenarios, because the infrastructure you build today needs to last at least 50 to 100 years.
Okay, so what's the practical advice for someone who's either developing land or buying into a new estate?
For developers, invest in proper stormwater engineering from the start. A $10,000 stormwater management plan can save you $200,000 in rectification, litigation, and reputational damage. For home buyers, ask for the stormwater management plan before you buy. Check for flood overlays, overland flow paths, and interallotment drainage easements. Get your engineering due diligence done early. For existing homeowners with flooding issues, get an independent engineering assessment to identify the cause. It may be actionable. The common sense message here: water always wins. You either plan for it or you pay for it.
All right, so if people are listening to this and thinking, that sounds like me, what's the one thing they should do right now?
Pick up the phone. Talk to a qualified engineer before you commit to anything. Not after, not when the problem shows up, before. That one conversation could save you more money than you'd believed.
And that's the JCE difference, right? You're not just ticking boxes, you're actually trying to help people avoid these traps.
That's exactly right. We've built our whole practice around giving people clear, practical, common sense advice before the problem starts, not after.
I love it. All right, if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with anyone you know who's building, developing, or renovating. It might just save them a fortune.
And if you've got a question or a topic you want us to cover, drop us a message through our socials or through JCE. We read everything.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And until next time.
See you on the next one.